Hello, everybody. Let's see. So I'm doing a live stream here to do something a little different. I've been working on recording all the chapters of my book um, and putting them out, and they don't get that many views. It's okay. It's all about the right one person finding it more so than the masses. Um, but I thought that I would do something a little different since I have a little bit more time. And I actually have a few already recorded that are going to be coming out the next few days. But I got to the new next section of the book, which looks all retarded in this PDF that I made. I made a horizontal PDF so that it would be easier to read on the screen for people who want to read along. But we got to this part, which is part 3. So it looks nicer here. Part 3, the Tectonic School Project. And these chapters are shorter. And what the little blurb for part 3 says, Part 3, the Tectonic School Project. This is the original document that inspired the rest of this book and my suggestion for a path forward. It directs resources to the very best investment, people. So that's the introduction to part 3 of the book out of 6, I think. And yeah, 6 parts. And these chapters are a little shorter. So this was like the first thing I wrote. And then I just kept thinking, like, as I'm writing it, I'm like, oh, I need to explain a little bit more. I needed to, it basically kept like adding introductions onto what I had, because I kind of had the idea first. And I don't know, maybe this is just the way my writing process works. Pretty much it's how I write. Like every article, I have an idea I have that I think is right, and then I start writing to explain it, and basically I just keep going backwards to make sure that my presuppositions are well grounded and I'm not being blindsided by some unknown thing. So, anyways, so these have been revised. I had published most of these actually on my Substack. I had the original thing, then I started going through editing them, try to polish it a little bit more, and I was publishing it in parts. And then I stopped that because I realized, okay, this is just going to end up being a book. And then I took them again and kind of polished them one more time. Now, the interesting thing is that the first part of this chapter, I guess it's actually this first chapter, really, is not. I take this section and I'm putting it into my new book, and then it's about a fourth or a fifth of the new book. But this chapter that starts off, which I titled Tectonic School, it was originally titled Virology, which is like the subtitle. It was kind of the introduction to the thing that I wrote after I put my first draft out. I wrote this as an introduction to it to try to make it something that would catch the attention. And that's not going to be in the next iteration of this thing. So my plan is that hopefully in the process of doing this, I read through everything cleanly and I can edit it out and take that and I'll put it a separate chapter where it's just the chapter, just so that the playlist is all good. But I figure I'll just go through, see what I like, what I don't like, stop along the way, and then I'll open it up and see if anybody's around who wants to chat. Obviously, I would appreciate any feedback on the writing, but I'm open to talk about whatever. So without any further ado, I'm going to get started. Chapter 23, Tectonic School, Virology. In the last decade, perhaps no concept has been as relevant to our understanding of the world we live in than that the term viral. I already messed something up in that sentence. We live in that the term, there's an extra live in than the term viral. That's what it should be. Okay. Okay. In the last decade, perhaps no concept has been as relevant to our understanding of the world we live in than the term viral. The two main areas that have brought this concept to the fore are that of the viral video or meme and the worldwide panic over coronavirus. When the viral content is fun and humorous, we have no problem with the fact that it spreads so rapidly. And like a seasonal cold, after a viral message has made its rounds, it tends to fade away. However, in the last few years, our society has made a concerted attempt to thwart both physical and informational viruses. In both regards, the effort has been unsuccessful. Despite measures to prevent contact far more strict than anything in living memory, the vast majority of populations still dealt with the novel virus in the usual way, by contracting and then recovering from infection. Similarly, during the contentious election cycles of the past few years, campaigns against misinformation have backfired. Trust in government and news institutions have fallen precipitously. And while there may not have been one particular viral strain that has overtaken the narrative, the power of the institutional media has waned severely. To liken it to a physical pandemic, the government and the news, which seeks to prop it up, has become a weak antibiotic. It leaves people vulnerable to all sorts of other infections. When enough of this exposure occurs, people are left without recourse. They have no ability to trust or believe anything. When the body's immune response is depleted, a person can fall to even the mildest of infections. Likewise, when the mind's ability to discern truth from lies erodes, it leaves people vulnerable to everything from apathy to genocide. Because trust in our institutions has eroded so much, many people are fearful of some sort of societal collapse. Alongside this fear is the worry about what will rush in to fill the void when our current structures finally give way. When the particular fears of individuals and communities range from totalitarianism to chaos and anarchy, there is no clear-cut solution. Okay, I think that's all pretty good. I mostly agree with everything I wrote there. I don't know if it was too wordy maybe, but it's decent. It holds up. Factions will react against both of these impulses Factions will react against both of these impulses whenever they sense them coming from voices of authority. Inevitably, this will result in the sort of collapse that we all fear. With such a collapse in sight, the words of Jesus echoed in Abraham Lincoln's mind. Every kingdom divided against itself will be ruined, and every city or household divided against itself will not stand. Matthew 12:25b. The Civil War was simply one of many prophetic fulfillments of the words spoken 18 centuries earlier. Francis Schaeffer, in his excellent book and video series, How Shall We Then Live?, compares the state of society to that of an ancient Roman bridge, a sturdy humpback arch of stone. When the weight placed upon the bridge stays below the limits of its design, it will last for millennia, as many such bridges have all across Europe. However, when the bridge is tasked with supporting the weight of a fully laden modern truck, it will collapse within moments. There is no way for common men and women to control the forces that have amassed the power and influence over the broad sweep of society, nor is there any way for individuals or small communities to prevent the effects of pressures from outside. To simply hope that nothing disastrous will happen is foolish and naive. While we all should pray for the protection and blessing of God on our nation, a wise man prepares for the coming storm. Okay, well, that's pretty good. Maybe I should put the video of Francis Schaeffer in there when I edit it. That might make it a little more fun. I wish I had done that now that I think about it with all these other ones, because there's a lot of videos I reference, and I put the links in there. And I'm guessing some people don't know this, but if you don't, if you take a picture of something with your phone, you can copy the text and paste it. So you can just take a picture of a link and post it, copy it and paste it into the browser, and you will be able to see it. That was my idea of just putting those links in there. I figured people could, if they really want to see it, they can. Yeah. So that's all pretty good. Okay. In Jesus' warning about the kingdom divided, he speaks on three levels of unity, three arenas of society: a kingdom, a city, and a household. If the kingdom is divided, but the city is not, then the fracture will only spread so far. In his comparison of the two builders, the wise man builds his house on the foundation of a rock. Metaphorically, this represents the one who heeds the words of Jesus. Seems like that's an abrupt skip ahead. Nope, I guess that's where it is. The foolish man builds his house on sand. This is to hear the words and ignore them. In many ways, we live in a house that has been inherited from the generations that came before. The foundations may have been solid when the walls were first raised, but if we have neglected to maintain the integrity of the structure, the stone may have become eroded. Therefore, we need to look at the foundation, to dig down below the surface and see what needs to be done. Fortunately, we are never in a truly hopeless situation. The great theme of the gospel is not a message that conquers the world through brute force of will, but through the redemption of the broken and bruised. The divisions that come from the top down may fracture nations, states, and cities. The households that are not united will tear apart, and even the individuals who are filled with conflict will be broken and consumed. But the fractures will stop when they reach something whole. Wholeness is not found in uniformity or perfection or superiority of raw material. The integrity of a structure is found in what unites the disparate parts. The foundation must be strengthened from the smallest parts first. The loose stones must be fitted and fixed in place. The tiniest pebble and even the shifting grains of sand can become a part of the firm foundation. What is needed is something that binds them together. The strongest mortar that can hold societies together is a self-sacrificial love. Not the sacrifice of the weak for the sake of the strong, but the sacrifice of the greatest for the sake of the least. The Marxist vision of utopia tries to compel people to live this way, to give up their own self-interest for the sake of the greater good. But the leader of such movements never leads by his own example, because he desires to be the beneficiary of the sacrifice of others. Only one movement has a leader who has sacrificed everything for the sake of his followers. The greatest truth that has ever been told is that the act of selfless generosity has already been done, and we are already the beneficiaries. But God demonstrates his own love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Romans 5:8. This was the truth presented to the oppressed and downtrodden in the message of the gospel, and the power of this message made it go viral. While many have sought to rediscover the most authentic version of Christianity, perhaps the difficulty of defining its truest form is that it is truly universal. The heart of this message cuts through culture, language, history, and tradition, and causes a flourishing of inner human life in any condition. The truest form of the gospel is the one that prepares believers to confront the unknown head on. Yeah, that's all pretty good. So now that I'm reading this again, I realize I did put a lot of the same things into the newer introduction that I wrote. I just wanted to get away from the virology language that I started with, and I think I returned to that later on because, well, it doesn't seem quite as relevant now in 2025. Yeah, maybe the viral nature of things is starting to break down in some sense. So the major shift I put was on integrity instead, and that wholeness, because that's what people I think are craving. They want to be people of integrity. They want to live in communities of integrity, and if it starts from the bottom and scales upward, that's kind of the effective path out of the mess that we're in. Okay, keep reading. Unfortunately, the virality of this message seems to have been lost in the confusion of the times in which we live. While we have updated the facade of our structures to keep up appearances, our reliance on the successful formulas of the past have caused us to stop maintaining the integrity of our foundations. What we have considered to be the heart of the gospel is something that our society has become immune to. Therefore, we must go back and rediscover what truly made this message a viral success, because the only suitable foundation for an unknown future is men and women surrendered to God. That was it. So, yeah, a really short chapter compared to some of these other ones that I've recorded. So, I will post the link here. And if anybody wants to join and say hello, that would be great. Maybe I'll just wait a few minutes. If nobody shows up, maybe I'll just read another chapter, because I think all the next ones are pretty short compared to the ones that I wrote later. Mark's got to go to bed. That's okay. So then the next one, Phoebus actually recorded this for me, and then he deleted his channel, and I hadn't taken the time to download it yet, so that kind of stinks, but oh well. And Luke actually did read one of the chapters for me, but I don't know when he sent me the link, but I missed it. So I told him to just put it out on his channel, so there will be another alternative reading of one of the chapters on Luke Thompson's channel at some point. And that will be a fun thing to hear. Maybe he'll get more comments than I typically do. Yeah, well, I'll just leave it open, so if anybody wants to jump in, they can, but I'll keep reading for now. Chapter 24, Institutions, the Great Commission. Jesus' final instructions in the Gospel of Matthew are as follows. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age. Matthew 28:19 through 20. These instructions were given to the 11 remaining disciples who had stayed by his side for the last 3 years, absorbing and following everything that he said and did. For the past several decades, the meaning of this command has been reduced to obtaining a confession of faith from as many people as possible, with the corresponding baptism. Many have criticized the evangelical movement for this emphasis on simple conversion, but real solutions to the problem have been lacking. A more recent emphasis has been placed on the concept of baptizing nations, which is a laudable goal for its ambition, but insofar as its focus has been on change through governmental and legislative action, or a Christianization of the government itself, the victories achieved are likely to have an effect of similar depth to the shallow evangelism described above. After all, many nations were fully baptized for centuries prior to the Reformation, but life in medieval Europe was not synonymous with the biblical vision of the kingdom of God. Yes, that's probably a thing that many would contest, the Peugeot lovers especially. Actually, man, I have a really great book to recommend. This book is called Baudolino by Umberto Eco, and it's a novel. And it takes place in 1204, or it starts in 1204, the character recounting his life of the 50 years or so prior. And it's interesting. It goes There's a lot of stuff in Italy and the Holy Roman Empire, and it goes into Byzantium, and then he goes on all these journeys to all the places with the weird medieval people that are drawn in the margins, like the people with no heads and their faces in their chest, and the people with one foot, and all the other weird kind of creatures, the dog-headed people. So it's this adventure that goes through all of that kind of symbolic world. But to me, it was very enjoyable because it kind of just showed, like, as different as the framework was, it's all the same. The way people argue with each other and the tribalisms and the things, there's a human nature aspect of it that I think it gets really right. And he's kind of like a medieval Forrest Gump. Like, he's this guy who you've never heard of, but somehow was like the key figure in all these important historical moments that happen. And then at the end of the book, basically the historian says, I'm not going to bother putting in the story of Baudolino because it's just too much to deal with. So anyways, it was a very enjoyable book. I would recommend it. It'd be great to have a conversation with other people about it at some point in the future. Okay, so that was jumping off of life in medieval Europe was not synonymous with the biblical vision of the kingdom of God. The idea best represented in the Great Commission is that self-replicating communities of strong believers would grow across the globe, that these 11 would each take on the role that Christ had played in guiding them, and from this example, many more would take the place of the first group, and new disciples would eventually learn and emulate the same roles for themselves. This natural progression between the master and the apprentice was a common practice in many parts of the world and in many disciplines. The master would take on one or more apprentices, and in time they would have the opportunity to go out on their own in a limited fashion and gradually gain autonomy with their growing expertise. True mastery was only conferred upon those who could not only do all the things their teacher could do, but could also excel in teaching the next generation. This model was the way that men have learned the skills of manhood: farming, blacksmithing, carpentry, and more. Women likewise learned the skills to keep a home and raise a family from the women of the previous generation. Some things may come directly from a father to son, others may be learned by studying under a master of some other discipline. The abandoned relationship of master and apprentice. Sadly, the young men of our generation are neither learning from their fathers or their teachers in an effective way. The wholesale export of education and training to the Department of Education and the public schools has failed boys and men. Except for the few who excel at the particular set of skills which are needed for the world of formal academics, boys are failing at an alarming rate. The church has not done much better. For those young men who may have felt the calling of God in their lives, two seemingly different paths are available, determined by the nature of their churches. In the older traditional denominations, only those who excel in the realm of academia have received the encouragement and support to make it through college and seminary all the way to a life of vocational ministry. In many of the newer evangelical churches, post-high school ministry training programs have sprung up, often associated with megachurches founded by charismatic and influential leaders. These schools attempt to reverse engineer the success of these institutions through analysis of the methods and practices. Yet in this circumstance, it is only those with the prerequisite personality traits of extroversion and agreeableness, similar to the founders, that truly flourish. The effect of this is that in almost every church in America, either a good-hearted but bookish pastor or a charismatic but superficial preacher presides over a congregation of women. The boys who are there are accompanied by only a mother in most circumstances, and of these young men, most will feel disconnected and unable to relate to the man in the pulpit who feels more comfortable behind a keyboard of one variety of another, and by that I meant typing or playing music, than he would behind a workbench. Of course, exceptions to these rules are not too difficult to find, and fortunately, there are still many godly men in various churches who can help fulfill the roles that the pastor is not able to. But these laymen are undervalued and unappreciated for the spiritual importance of their role and for the far greater potential that they can fill. If a young pastor finds himself working at a small congregation that does not employ a full staff, he will soon find that his ability to preach, teach, and lead worship is of secondary importance to his ability to fix and maintain an aging and ailing building. If the congregation has no men with expertise in the areas of building repair and maintenance, the pastor will be forced to make difficult decisions about the use of church funds to pay for repairs. This may affect his own livelihood. That is a noble sacrifice if he chooses to make it, but if he is being ripped off because he has no concept of what is needed or how much it should cost, his naivety obscures his nobility. Or he may have to make the decision to downsize the use and functionality of the building. Will his congregation be willing to suffer through an underheated building? Will they be happy to worship with their jackets on, or meet in a tiny classroom with a space heater while the sanctuary remains dark? The faithful few may endure these trials with a joyful spirit, but it will not bring seekers into the building. The results of the church going along with the societal decision to emphasize an academic knowledge and success over other forms of learning, and the increased reliance on expertise and specialization in various fields of study, have left the church, in its broadest sense, as a cultural and societal force, weak, impotent, and irrelevant. When we look back on the history of the church, we often wonder in amazement, how did a ragtag band of working class men, many of them untrained and uneducated, start a movement that resulted in the conversion of the Roman Empire and the lasting achievements of Western civilization? What is often marveled at in such statements is that they lacked the expertise of the other religious and political factions, the traditions of the rabbis, the knowledge of the Greeks, the discipline of the Romans. But what if it was precisely because they lacked these things that they achieved their high level of success? What if the lowly nature of their positions as carpenters, fishermen, and tax collectors, who were seen as thieves and criminals, was not a bug, but a feature? People in machine-shaped holes. If we examine virtually any long-standing institution, we will notice a trend towards inefficiency and immobility over time. As movements become institutionalized, there is an accrual of power and influence, but a loss of flexibility and immediacy. This means that in any large, centralized organization, it becomes almost impossible to accomplish even the simplest tasks that fall outside the normal parameters of operations. Bureaucracy and dogmatic thinking creep in, and the central purpose of organizations can be lost. Contrast the inefficiency of this model with the practical wisdom of those who work with their hands. If you don't work, you don't eat. 2 Thessalonians 3:10 CEV. While we might imagine a phrase like this being used to express a consequence of laziness, such as meal privileges being withheld from a prisoner, for most people in most places, this was simply a representation of reality. Humans will die if they do not work to obtain food. If a fisherman does not fish, he will not have fish to eat. Even to pick food off a plant is work, and the institutional powers affirm this. Footnote, Matthew 12:1-2. At that time, Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath. His disciples were hungry and began to pick some heads of grain and eat them. When the Pharisees saw this, they said to him, "Look, your disciples are doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath." End footnote. The impulse to categorize, label, and document everything can't account for the power of people to simply act. When you are hungry, the fruit that you can grasp with your hand is food, And when you eat it, your work has been productive, regardless of what the bureaucracy might say about it. There is a real power in the human ability to use our hands. We often forget this because our work is so often mediated through machines and organizations. When we work in the digital space, we delegate the formation of our letters to the computer we type on. Each keystroke is identical to another. We don't worry about penmanship, legibility, or consistency in the spacing of our letters and words. When our words are required to be put on the page, we delegate this task to a printer. At least the envelope is usually stuffed by hand. This is why we value a mailed letter more than an email, and a handwritten letter more than a printed one. The effort of using our own hands to express words of meaning to a loved one comes through on the page. This connection between the work of the hands and the labor of the spirit is something that has become obscured by the way that we live our lives in the digital age. Paul advises the Colossian church, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for human masters. Colossians 3:23. But this becomes of little comfort when the work before you is simply the manipulation of numbers on a screen, and you know that no matter how much you accomplish today, the same thing awaits you tomorrow and forever. Those who can find satisfaction in an environment like this will be blessed. But for most of us, it's hard to see how we can do anything differently because we are working for the Lord. Will our completion percentage increase from 93% to 94%? Will our ability to commune with Christ allow us to skip that last bathroom break and gain another 0.1% efficiency? If these are the differences between those who believe and those who do not, will our employer be impressed? Will they realize that it was your spiritual act of worship to sacrifice the comfort of your bladder to gain that extra point? Or will they simply decide that 94% is the new baseline and complain when next month you only get to 93%? Is that how we imagine the Lord would act as an employer? Contrast this with the trades of our grandfathers and great-grandfathers. A fallow field is made ready to receive seed. A foundation is poured, a wall is lifted, an empty barn is filled with bales of hay. Broken things are fixed, new things are created. Wisdom is employed to know when the extra time and effort are necessary to get the job done right, or when a quick fix will do, and that extra attention can be better spent with family. In a scenario such as this, it is easy to see how one could imagine their work as being done for the Lord and not for man. Jesus worked for long hours, but he took time to retreat from the crowds. He praised not only the effort of those who worked diligently in his teaching, but those who worked shrewdly and with cleverness and ingenuity. He emphasized to Martha that some things superseded the need to get chores done, yet he himself picked up the basin and the towel to perform the lowliest of tasks for his disciples. Cool. Yeah, it all still seems to fit pretty well together. Guess I'll just keep going. Or I'll just, if anybody wants to come in, feel free to come in, and I can resume this reading at another time. But if not, I will keep going for now. No. Okay. The body, atrophied and splintered. The problem with applying many of the teachings of the Bible to our own lives is not that we have forgotten how to be spiritual, but in many ways it is that we have forgotten how to be human. We have begun to view ourselves as almost completely cerebral, treating the body as a vestigial remnant of an ancestral past. Our digital personas have become more meaningful to us than our physical selves. To remedy this problem, Many have realized that physical and embodied expressions of spiritual activity are necessary to the complete health of human beings. Thus, things like yoga, Tai Chi, or disciplined breathing and meditation practices have become increasingly popular. There is a realization that the physical body must be incorporated into our spiritual practice. Conversely, whatever the physical body is oriented towards will become the substance of a person's spiritual life. For many, the link between the physical and the mental/spiritual becomes so deep that even if they were not seeking it, working out becomes their religion, and the gym becomes their temple. However, as this becomes another necessary use of our precious and limited time, what is meant to rejuvenate the soul can become a burden on our conscience. Like most things in life, these disciplines require faithful and regular practice to bear the fruit that is promised. Only those with the luxury of time, which is afforded by the luxury of financial security, can fully benefit from these practices. When the demands of work and household duties become urgent, the time for meditation is often the first thing to go. And if this was not already a part of your routine, then physical exercise is the next thing to be eliminated. Our disjointed society has placed an extreme burden on the individual to balance and maintain all the aspects of a healthy and meaningful human life: career success, financial stability, a stylish apartment, a beautiful home, a fashionable wardrobe, the newest gadgets, exciting experiences, meaningful friendships, passionate romance, carefree sex, travel and adventure, physical fitness, intellectual stimulation, mental health, spiritual awareness, healthy diet, culinary delights, total freedom and autonomy, the benefits of marriage and family, a full night's sleep. And all of this is to be displayed in an edited and curated form for others to see and enjoy on social media. The completely illogical belief that all of these things are simultaneously necessary and possible for an individual to achieve and maintain guarantees that no one can rest peacefully at the end of the day, because they have certainly failed in several areas of their life. The same spirit that infects countless other worldviews throughout history is present in the culture of our day. The spirit that demands more and more until it consumes all of our time, effort, energy, and willpower. Despite our best efforts, it will not be satisfied. Christians have by no means escaped this trap. For many, many people, attending church, small groups, Bible studies, participation in outreach and service, as well as daily habits of prayer and reading the Bible, simply become more items that must be stuffed into our already busy lives. The perpetual failure to do so leaves us in a state of near constant disappointment. The only solution to the various and overwhelming demands placed on our time and attention is to eliminate as many as necessary to make our lives manageable and reasonable. This is the solution that is espoused by leaders in many areas, and the solution that many people arrive at simply by exhausting the other options. The question is, what becomes central and what is discarded? For entrepreneurs and workaholics, career success and accumulation of wealth becomes central. In making this a priority, other things may still be important, such as fitness and image, because this aids in achieving the central goal. But relationships, family, leisure activities, and the pursuit of the arts become much more likely to be eliminated. For gurus of fitness and health, the needs of the body become central, diet and exercise, and this can shade towards the spiritual as well, in the form of New Age spirituality. What becomes secondary for this group can be more varied. It could be family, or financial stability, or intellectual pursuits. Many people are led not by individuals, but by the powerful forces of marketing agencies in our consumerist economy. This can be expressed in the form of influencers. those stylish fashionistas who enjoy posting about their clothes and fine dining experiences in a cosmopolitan setting. However, it is the same central principle that leads to the fast food addicted video gamer who still lives in his parents' basement. The things eliminated as irrelevant are different, but the guiding principles are the same. Christians would espouse that our relationship with God is the central thing that should guide our life, and I would suggest that this is true. But within that frame, we are also tempted to make certain secondary principles within the faith central and eliminate others due to our finite natures. If someone is in a relationship with God, we can be hopeful that they will discern what to make central and what should be eliminated. We understand that as an individual, a choice to forgo marriage and family as an act of service towards God could be a beautiful thing. It can become a very dangerous thing when the culture of the church elevates this lifestyle to an implicit position of higher spiritual authority than marriage and parenthood. In an effort to focus on the most central things, there are a few ways that Christian communities have tended to overemphasize one element of the Christian walk while undervaluing another. Perhaps the most common one in our current culture is the emphasis on a model of attractive evangelism. The well-intentioned desire to bring as many people into the church to hear and experience the message of the gospel has resulted in a dilution of Jesus' command to make disciples who obey all of his teachings. While the formation of this method of church building was started as a corrective reaction to the ossified traditions of the past, it too had the potential of making central a secondary, if underemphasized, aspect of the Christian faith. In reality, this version of the Christian faith holds very little influence over the lives of its adherents outside of a few hours on Sunday. The disillusionment with this commercialized, marketing-driven form of Christianity has led many people to abandon the faith of their parents. If they come to embrace Christianity in some other form, the tendency is to look back towards the past, to some prior form, in order to avoid the mistakes that cause modern Christianity to go astray. Well, that chapter I thought was pretty good. Before this section, I read this whole section on economics and stuff, and it's interesting because this was a lot of stuff that I wrote when I wasn't so convinced of. I wrote it because I was like figuring it out, and then became somewhat more convinced of where my positions should be through the process of writing. I try to weigh all the different things, and there's a lot of stuff in there that you could put as pretty doomerish. Like I've talked a little bit about the doomerism of Paul Kingsnorth and stuff. It's not like I haven't gone through all those things. It just seems like there's a certain percentage of people that say like we must not allow these things to happen because it's going to be really bad. But I am pretty convinced that a lot of these things are inevitable, at least for certain people. Like we don't all have to live, like machines, but a certain amount of people are going to sign up for it. And a lot of those things there's really actually compelling reasons why. And, his life as the agrarian Irish mystic is just as much one of these inachievable things as all those other influencer lifestyles. And so, I think you could easily slot that in as like my critique very much agrees with some of his, but it also critiques what I think some of his solutions are. So, yeah. I'll just put the link again. If anybody else wants to chat, I can do this for a while. Maybe I should use the other screen. No, I'm not going to bother doing that. I have an extra screen now, so I could do work at home better. But is that what I said? I think we should ask a lot for what Jesus can do for us. The more he does for us, the more we can do for him. It's a reciprocally broadening relationship. All right. Read another chapter here. I said these ones are all pretty short. Chapter 25, Solutions. I guess that's how I should read it with the question mark. The trade-offs of turning to past answers. And you'll see in here, I really tried to be, balancing statements and all this stuff. I wanted to make this book accessible to anybody, regardless of their particular brand of Christianity, while poking at the problems. But, when it comes to like evangelicalism, I feel like I can poke pretty hard at their problems too. In some ways, I probably can poke at them harder than other people. But fair warning here, I will criticize some of the past older versions of Christianity a little bit in this chapter. So, the trade-offs of turning to past answers. There is nothing implicitly wrong with returning to the traditional forms of Christianity. But to avoid the same problem experienced in the lives of those disillusioned by the modern church, an individual must decide to let the practice of their faith take a more central role, and many historical traditions will guide a person towards doing this in a specific way. The oldest traditions have developed a communal lifestyle for those who want to make their faith in the guiding principle of their lives. In the Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox churches, this is most fully exhibited in the monastic community. These communities can vary in their specific purposes. Some are more academic and intellectual, others are more oriented towards serving others, while the most insular may be almost completely devoted towards the specific spiritual activities of prayer and worship. In many of the low church traditions, the fullest expression of a total lifestyle devotion is displayed in communities such as the Amish and the Mennonites. There is a strong impulse for many people to return to this lifestyle, with many new communities forming around a desire to protect children and families from undue influence and stem the ever-encroaching impact of technology on our daily lives. The problem is that these communities also make central some particular point of the spiritual life of the Christian, while downplaying or eliminating others. The monastic tradition forgoes the necessity of natural reproduction, the first command given by God to all mankind, elevating an exception above the normative practice. This first command was never rescinded in the text. It still reflects part of God's original hope for mankind, and the only means through which the total population of souls comes to increase. For this reason, the monastic orders can only perpetuate their own existence by asking others to make the same sacrifice of childlessness. During the times when the Catholic/Orthodox Church was the only church, the teaching that a life of celibate devotion was the highest calling led to a two-tiered class distinction that caused serious harm to society. In the case of the other communities, the lack of emphasis on evangelism of any sort causes them to be insular. Within the community, all may be well, although that is rarely the case, but with everyone sequestered away from the rest of the world, they provide little benefit to the greater community, and they fail to complete the Great Commission by reaching the lost. Moreover, these communities are often difficult for outsiders to join, creating an additional barrier to entry. Of the few instances where communities were both closed off and celibate, such as the Shakers, the predictable outcome of extinction is no surprise. Groups like this are usually formed after yet another central principle, that the return of the Lord is so near at hand and the corruption of the world is so complete that there is no point in devoting energy to evangelism or family life. When either a predicted date of destruction comes and goes, or the lives of the initial founders end, the community tends to dissolve shortly thereafter. There is a term that describes all of these issues, whether they are of the secular or Christian variety, and that term is idolatry. Idolatry can be described as the mistake of confusing the created thing for the creator, or to make something central which is meant to be peripheral. In all of these worldview examples, some object, aspect, or ideal of God's creation has replaced God himself as the central point of focus within the worldview. Not every single individual is guilty of this, but the societal thrust that emphasizes a particular aspect of creation as being central tempts us to place that thing in the central role that only God can rightly occupy. The difficulty in diagnosing this problem with idolatry is that those individuals whose hearts are centered around the worship of the true God will still embody their worship through these secondary means. Thus, one man can rightly focus his heart on God, and the fruit of this will be a re-emphasis on evangelism in his community. Another man with the same correct posture of worship will bear fruit that calls people back to a focus on their roles within the family. Yet another man may bear fruit by helping those around him rediscover the traditions of spiritual formation and liturgical worship. Still others may manifest their love of God through the very things that secular people are trying to center their lives around: integrity in the workplace, care for the health and stewardship of the physical body, or a desire to beautify and protect our natural environment. God can be and is present through all these different movements, and he will continue to bear fruit and grow his kingdom through various individuals in these very different domains. To some degree, failure and imperfection are inevitable as long as God chooses to move through flawed and broken people. But instead of focusing on eliminating the particular failures of various traditions and communities, our goal should be to highlight their strengths and uses for particular times and places. Imperfect tools and imperfect workers are not obstacles to God building the kingdom he desires. The purpose for the plan. Okay, so this is one of these things where I literally wrote got to a point of writing where I said, what is the point of me writing these things? And I had to reset. And so that's what this is. So I think I ended up moving this in my new editing to kind of just put it like more in the beginning. But either way, the purpose for the plan. What is the purpose of writing this message and proposing the plan that I am developing? While I firmly believe in the ability for God to connect with man in any and every time and place, our current society has dulled and blunted many of the tools that have historically been used to lead people to a knowledge of Christ. Beyond this, I am working as an individual to help correct the problems that I see within a certain demographic portion of society that has particular meaning to myself. Hopefully, some of the thoughts I am developing here will be of enough broad-reaching application that others can use them as a starting point for other groups of people. For the sake of clarity, I will attempt to keep this plan focused, with occasional explorations of broader application. The area of focus that I am principally concerned with is young men. At this point, the ideas I am developing will be specifically pointed to men of about 18 years of age, though certainly a large number of men who are older in years have not progressed beyond that level of responsibility, and they would also be included in this plan. Eventually, this plan could be expanded in one direction to include boys of a much younger age. It could also be expanded in a different direction to help women and girls. But for now, consider that most of the information here is directed at those leaders who focus on young men between the ages of 18 and 30. Why this particular demographic? For one thing, it is the group from which I came, and it is the group for whom my personal experience is most beneficial. Beyond that, there is a particular lack of good solutions to this demographic, and it is these young men who are most penalized, demonized, and victimized by traditional institutions. The following statistics demonstrate the problem. Of students graduating college, 60% are women compared to only 40% men, and the gap is widening. Of people attending churches on a weekly basis, once again, 60% are female versus 40% male. 40% of children are born to unmarried or single parents, with some states reaching as high as 55%. And of the children being raised by only one parent, 80% are being raised without a father. To fall into a single category is a huge detriment for a man entering society. To suffer from all three is devastating. There has never been more men and boys who have no experience of seeing and experiencing the example of a good man. They have never seen a man be a husband, a father, a hard worker, or a leader. There is no hope of such men arising naturally from these broken patterns. The good news is that almost any man can be an influence in changing these patterns for the future. The best place to start is in the area of work, for the individual and the community. The main goal of this course of action is to first help young men find a calling and vocation to help them grow, to keep them from falling to the wayside or becoming destructive and harmful to themselves and those around them. The second goal is to revivify the local church by infusing congregations with men equipped to lead and influence growth and health in the community at all levels, from the position of participating members and occasional volunteers to lay leaders and pastoral staff. The third goal is to encourage young men to consider marriage and fatherhood not only as sacrificial acts of service to help them grow and become the best men possible, but as the normative means to the most fulfilling and enjoyable life. This plan will be designed to be implemented on many levels of intensity and complexity. At the most basic level, this should be something that a father can use to help teach his sons. It could also be used by Christian business owners who want to develop a discipleship relationship with their employees and apprentices. At its higher levels, centers could be developed to help provide vocational training or ecclesiastical training, or to provide basic life skills and allow students to pursue further training in any field of study that interests them. Ultimately, the goal is to create disciples of Jesus Christ, but not merely modern people who can espouse propositional knowledge of the Gospels, but people who know Christ deeply, who have encountered the true power of the gospel, and who have allowed it to penetrate and permeate through every facet of their being. This means that the fragmented splinters of modern life must be reintegrated and connected to a central goal. This goes beyond forming the lives of young men to a particular pattern of success or emulating great men who have lived such lives in the past. It means the cultivation of each human heart to receive and grow the seed of faith presented to us in the gospel, so that each person can bear fruit unique to that particular tree and the ground that it is planted in. Once the centrality of the role of Christ in our lives is reestablished, God can use men submitted to his will to grow the kingdom of God. This means not only growth in churches and church attendance, but revivification of culture, society, the physical infrastructure of our land, and the common moral fabric of our people. No part of this plan is directed towards influencing politics or the way churches operate, or to promote the superiority of any one form of Christianity over another, although such things should be expected to change for the better as a result. In many ways, it does follow the plan of others who are intending to start intentional communities centered around Christ. But instead of crafting a community, my goal is to create tools to equip individuals. Some may go on to start intentional communities, but many others may be moved to strengthen and salvage the remnants of communities established long ago. Returning to the roots of creation. The instinct to correct what is wrong today leads us to look back at the successes of the past. This is the impulse behind the movement to embrace traditional forms of Christian community. We look back and notice that those communities have not suffered the same ill consequences of modernity as seen in our typical evangelical churches, and therefore we seek to live in such a way to escape the fate we wish to avoid. But this is nearsighted. We need to look back farther, not only to the successful communities and movements of the past, but to their founding, to the principles remembered or discovered that led to their success. If we continue searching backwards, we can look back all the way to the founding of the church. There have been many communities and movements designed around the desire to emulate the church in the first century. But this is also not a sufficient starting place. If we do our research, we will discover that the flourishing of the church in the few decades after the resurrection was due to a very particular set of circumstances that were actually centuries in the making. The circumstances at that time were global, at least affecting all of the known world. God was, of course, active and moving in other areas of the world, unknown and undiscovered at the time of Christ, preparing them to encounter a church that still needed to grow and develop. But prior to these events, God had worked through the nation of Israel, his chosen people. He used both their success and their failure to his purpose. Through the events of the diaspora, Jewish communities developed all over the nations and empires of the Mediterranean world. They were alike in their identity as servants of the Most High, yet very different, as they integrated and morphed the culture of the nations in which they lived to express their faith in a variety of ways that both complemented and contrasted the lifestyles of their immediate neighbors. Perhaps the greatest invention of the Hebrew people was the creation of alphabetic language, a huge improvement over the previous types of written language. And this invention was spread primarily through the fastidious keeping of their written scripture. This scripture is the inheritance not only of the Jewish people, but of Christians as well. The Hebrew Bible, its commentaries, pseudo-epigraphic books, and other texts included within certain manuscripts contain an unbroken narrative connecting it from the time of Christ all the way back to the first man created in the image of God. While historians will debate the accuracy of this text in comparison to other sources, and others will question the story of all humanity descending from a single man and woman, there is enough evidence of undesigned coincidences to be found in comparative mythologies the world over to commend the validity of these stories. Those who have experienced God through the words found in the newer parts of Scripture, through a conversion experience, should at least give serious and careful consideration to the reliability of those older parts of Scripture. For the purpose of the plan at hand, we will consider these stories to be correct, whether we view them symbolically, archetypical, or historically. These stories were meaningful and important enough for our ancient ancestors to preserve, and similar enough to the tales of other cultures that we should consider what they can teach us. The purpose of the man in the garden. Since we have a means by which we can examine the history of human culture all the way back to the beginning, we should comb through the text to derive as much knowledge and information about how our culture and community should be formed. In Genesis 2:5, it says that prior to the creation of man, there was no one to till the ground. From this, we can deduce that this work of tilling the earth was an important part of the purpose for which we were created. This purpose to till the ground is not connected to the sinful nature of mankind, but is part of the very good nature of man, part of the Imago Dei, the image of God imprinted into our very being. In verse 18, God reveals that it is not good for man to be alone. This is revealed to the man through his attempt to find companionship by identifying and naming the various beasts of the field. And after it is apparent that none are suitable, God creates the woman. This too is prior to any corruption of sin on the part of the man. So the need for community between man and woman is revealed to be a part of the very good design that God had for mankind. From this, we can gather that God always intended man to work, to expand the territory of the garden, and that he should do so in a reproductive relationship with the woman to improve the quality and direction of their work, and to fulfill the command to multiply, so that the population of humans could grow. He instituted a day of rest so that there were rhythms to the work, time to reflect on our accomplishments, and time to enjoy the fruits of our labor. All of this was part of God's plan for humans from the beginning, and a return to this path has always been part of God's redemptive plan to rescue us from our own mistakes. The return to our first duties. The corruption of sin, described in the next chapter of Genesis, does nothing to change the basic purpose for which humankind was created. It increased the difficulty, and this was done for the benefit of humanity. The failure of Adam and Eve in the garden could be summarized as a failure to trust God's wisdom, honor his authority, and believe his words. The temptation came from the serpent, who cast doubt by asking, "Did God really say?" This insertion of doubt changed the landscape in the eyes of Eve, who instead of seeing the garden as a world of abundance with one simple prohibition, now saw one prohibition as arbitrary and unnecessary. She may have been hindered by receiving the instruction secondhand, as her additional commandment not to even touch the tree was likely provided by Adam, adding a fence of protection around the command given to him by God. Nevertheless, when using the faculties she had to assess the fruit, she saw nothing dangerous in its appearance. In some ways, the garden was both the safest and the most treacherous place to begin, because there was almost nothing Adam and Eve could do to harm themselves or foil the intended purpose. But when the sole commandment was broken, it resulted in their exile. These events were followed by a new set of rules. The man and woman were bound together in hardship, and hard labor would become their lot in life. But never again would they take for granted the value of a well-kept garden. When nature provided them respite in the season of harvest or an unforeseen bounty, they would focus on the good that they had, not what was taken from them. They were truly taken down to the roots to find their strength in the soil. This was the first new beginning. Their ultimate salvation was to come in the form of a child, and so all their efforts were directed towards growing and feeding their family. From then on, God sent a myriad of children who brought their fathers into the land of peace and rest. These anointed men all point towards the ultimate Son who would finish the work of the serpent. The first savior of humankind was Noah, the builder of the ark. God could have protected humanity through supernatural means alone, but instead, he commissioned righteous Noah to complete a building project. God provided the direction and the dimensions, but as far as we know, he relied on the ingenuity and creativeness of Noah to complete this task. God made the man built the ark, and the ark preserved the components of creation needed to foster the growth of humanity through the next phase of history. Abraham became the father of many nations, most of them establishing their borders and began to build and plant in the land given to them. But Isaac and his son Jacob, though they did not build permanent homes in the land God had given them, they lived as herders, stewarding the land and protecting it for future generations. Even in this impermanent state, they still worked the earth, building many wells that exist even to this day. Joseph, the son of Jacob, was brought into the land of Egypt against his will, but God used the gifts and wisdom he had given Joseph to build the kingdom of Egypt into an economic powerhouse. He wisely stored vast amounts of food and used this to protect not only the Egyptians from starvation, but all known nations in the world. Through wise administration, Joseph safely regulated the food supply for people that likely never experienced famine before and had no safeguarding habits of long-term food storage. God made the man built the kingdom, and the kingdom preserved mankind for the next phase of human history. When the kingdom of Egypt became corrupt, God removed his people from that land. Moses delivered the Israelites from the Egyptians, and in the wilderness, God gave them a special purpose. He revealed his law to them and gave them a task to complete. This was the creation of the tabernacle, a tent of worship, and all the articles to be used in the practice of the priesthood. All the items were designed to reflect a return to the original patterns of creation and rest that were part of God's original plan for mankind. God appointed certain men that he had selected because he had created them with the skills and insight to complete these tasks. The plans were revealed to Moses, but Bezalel and Aholiab were the men selected by God to craft these items. Through their wisdom, they taught and appointed other men to complete some of the tasks, but the most crucial items were crafted by their own hands, such as the Ark of the Covenant. The result of this effort was the construction of not only a temple, but a nation of people skilled to work for God. Eventually, the Israelites returned to their promised homeland. God used them as an instrument to remove the inhabitants. This land of milk and honey was given to them ready to move in. They settled in homes that they did not build, with vineyards they did not plant, like a return to the Garden of Eden. In this way, even those who are not chosen by God are still used as instruments to build the homes of his children. But they were not brought in simply to enjoy the fruits of another's labors. God restored to them the circumstances under which he first gave the command, "Be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it." With a glimpse of God's glory restored in the land, they were to take it from glory to glory, continuing his original plan. David captured and built up the capital city, Jerusalem, and his son Solomon built a temple that was renowned throughout the known world. This temple was a glimpse into both the past and the future, a physical monument to the creative enterprise of God and his purpose for mankind. It was a gilded reflection of the glory of Eden and a foreshadowing of the everlasting city to come. Every square inch was designed to lead people to contemplate and reflect on the glory of God through creation. It was not during their trials and labors that the Israelites went astray, but during their times of success and indulgence. Following their greatest height of economic prosperity, the kingdom was split in two. As the vineyards and fields planted by their fathers and grandfathers began to produce less, the coming generations did not turn towards the Lord for guidance, but instead began offering sacrifices to foreign gods. They committed the sin of idolatry, making central the things that ought to be peripheral, asking false gods to restore what had been taken from them, instead of thanking the true God for the circumstances that he deemed best for their growth. The acts of worship performed for these idols were counterproductive to the plans God had set forth since the beginning. The false gods, whether they were truly demons or simply the manifestations of the people's sinful desires, were never satisfied. They would demand the fruits of harvest without allowing time for planting. Both the calf and the cow were taken for a gluttonous feast, and the solemn rituals of the marriage tent were displayed on the high places to sap the desire of young men and women and spill their seed on lifeless soil. I'll be right back. Ah, I just got to pick up a kid real quick from her crib. I'll be back in a minute. Hello, Yoav. How are you?
Well, I'm fine. How are you?
Good. Just working my way through reading the big book so that people can listen to it.
Yeah, a very big book.
Yeah.
So you said that in a way everything was a preamble and you're starting to get to the point. And in the recent chapter, you stated a problem. And it seems as if you were starting to outline a solution. And then again, you are rephrasing the whole of the Bible.
Yeah. So this is, I mean, it is the rough draft. So that was the moment where I like literally stopped and said, okay, wait, why am I doing this? To get myself back to the point, you know, because that was the first idea. Like, hey, we need to find jobs for the guys, and a way to get the community back together. But I just wanted to use as the it's very easy to just look at a solution to a current problem and not and you things are going a certain way, so you say, well, let's pull the pendulum back the other way because that's going to fix things, but that creates its own problem. So you have to know what the center line is. What is the the main goal from the beginning? So that was what I was tracing there, try to figure out what is the main goal. Is it seems to me like this certain themes, very simple, but that work is good, it's part of the plan. We need things to do, makes us feel useful, and relationships are good, marriage and family and all that. And God's got a plan for improving the land and all that. So it seems like that's all pretty central. So those are the very broad points that I wanted to pull out as a guide, I would say.
Okay.
Yeah.
But things are not going your way in terms of work. If the key is to put mind back to work as the economic situation develops, work is becoming more and more scarce.
Mm-hmm.
Things are not very promising. I'm not pushing back against the idea of work because I like it on principle. Was just saying, well, it would have been very nice if I could provide everybody with meaningful jobs. And then when they have meaningful jobs, they will get properly paid for them, and then they will be able to establish a family and build a house. Yeah, this is how it should have been. But still, this is not the way things are going. So what's the solution?
Well, I think the solution is, you gotta, well, okay. So first of all, I think that problem is artificially created by this sort, by the mostly good society that we have. I don't want it to collapse. But if it did, if everything, if every official institution and government and all that crashed tomorrow, well, then people would just pretty quickly start figuring out either my job is stupid and I'm not going to go to it because it's not going to, because if the paycheck they're giving me doesn't help me get food and keep my family, a roof over their head, I got to do something else. So maybe you just take care of that directly, So people start saying, hey, we got to start planting gardens or something. And well, probably you'll have gangs and stuff. So you have to worry about defending yourself from the raiders. But but we don't want that to happen. But my thought is, if you get into some sort of a local community, then you have some, throughout the book, I pointed at a bunch of things. Creative housing solutions is, I think, a hard one. I think that's probably the biggest thing is housing solutions for people. Because right now, the incentive is just to build little tiny apartments that are like for individuals, and once you move into one of those, it's hard to become anything more than an individual. So
but just to sharpen the point, a housing solution is not the solution. The solution is a meaningful, well-paid job that allows you to acquire the accommodation. If the government hands you the flat, it still solves nothing.
Well, no. So the meaningful job that allows you to afford it, maybe, but if it wasn't for the fact that there's all sorts of red tape or something, you can just build it. Just build the thing you need. It's a lot cheaper. So then you don't need as much of a job. I mean, in a lot of places, the people who are building the houses can't afford the houses that they're building in. This is the case for fortunately, I work in a sufficiently fancy house that I can afford a simple one, but the people building the simple houses, they can't afford to buy a simple house, So then you have like the illegal immigrants, they get one place to rent and they let their 17 cousins all live there with them. That's how they're kind of like trying to beat the system. So, I mean, it could be some things like that, it's a lot of creative things. But it's normalizing some of those creative solutions, I think, is a big part of the thing. But you have to keep the goal in mind, Like I think young men don't feel very needed or useful. They don't feel like they have a lot of chance to have the kind of success maybe that their parents' generation had. Marriage seems like a difficult thing to acquire for most of them. So, I mean, it's a big problem. It's a lot of big problems, but it's chipping away at all the little things you can do, maybe working from the ground up. That was the idea.
Yeah. So, we're not calling them sissies. When we say young men do not feel themselves needed, it's not a matter of their feeling not being well adjusted. It's the matter that they are indeed, nobody has any need for them.
Mm-hmm.
That is the hard truth of the matter.
Well,
how do you change reality so that young men will be needed? One way to do it is war.
Yeah, not the best.
Not the best, but I'm just pointing to the sort of the pyramids were a better solution. Why won't we build the pyramids? You need a lot of... if you really believe in building pyramids, then needs a lot of people. Lots of people are having good, satisfying jobs, and there is enough grain in the land of Egypt to feed them anyway. Anyway, you grow the crops in Egypt in certain season, certain short season, and you're idle the rest of the season, and you could just you have to invent the pyramids in order to avoid the kind of social upheaval that we are facing. So war is one solution, pyramids is another.
Yeah, build pyramids on Mars, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, but this is a problem because you need a lot of cheap, unskilled workers to build pyramids. If I gave you millions of unskilled young men eager to work, you still cannot use. How would you employ them in such a way as to achieve the goal of building pyramids in Mars?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I started off the book with saying, how come the pyramids are still here, but the culture that built the pyramids is not? So there was something wrong with that culture.
Yeah, but they were stable longer than ours.
Well, maybe. Who knows? I mean, there's, I think that's one of those logarithmic curve kind of things where it just took a really long time to put 2 and 2 together, and then once you figure that out, then you can, then adding 4 and 4 is comes a lot quicker, something like that, So I mean, the longevity of the culture is, I mean, like, because if we want to do that according to the official sources, there's like this 100 million year or 100,000 year or something human culture that didn't do anything but like eat stuff off of plants and maybe rub 2 sticks together every once in a while, like. And we're not saying like, oh, look how great that culture was because it lasted for such a long time. So, I mean, I think that we're maybe in some ways the fact that we.
Well, I don't want to return to the old Egyptian way. I'm just trying to indicate the sort of direction that how would the solution look like? Another question. Who is the target of your plan? Say that you had the plan and you're trying to introduce the plan to some decision maker. My rhetorical question now is, who is this decision maker you're addressing? It cannot be the young men themselves.
No.
Because, as I said, it's not that their perception of reality is correct. So
well, I mean, it can. So so it's whose year I want is local churches, local pastors. They have a small enough, world that they can deal with, and then to realize, like, hey, so long as you do have some men in your community who know how to do some stuff, like. Forget about whatever you do on Sunday morning. This is the problem. Most churches are just, that's all they ever think about. I know a guy, he's got a big church. He was one of my groomsmen in my wedding.
Sorry to interrupt. Just an editorial. If the local preacher or pastor is your target, you're spending too many pages in teaching him the Bible. Should assume that you know
maybe so. Well. So the point of the big book too was for the young man to read. Say, here, read 1 chapter a week. There's 53 chapters, I think. So, you get through it in a year. So I thought I did. One of my goals was sort of to make it a curriculum. So that in that case, the bigness is a little bit more acceptable, I guess. And that's why I'm making the smaller version.
Oh,
The
okay.
smaller version directed.
Oh, okay. Well, let's
For the
go.
past.
I was cutting your thread. So your target is the local preacher.
Yeah.
As far as I understand the situation in the West, the local preacher is fighting very hard to survive. He can hardly maintain his own church.
Yeah.
How capable is he to be of any help?
So my friend's church, they're having great success because they started a school, they started a doctor's office, and I think they're trying to do some other things with like work related things. So a church is the right scale or size enough to basically, because they have space, if you have space and you have time and you have people that are willing to work, maybe some as volunteers or work for less, you can create enough of a sort of a subsidy to create some opportunities that are basically making the amenities that the wealthy people can get more accessible to a broader audience. And then my particular thing is, well, the most important of that is to get the young men involved, because you don't want them to go join gangs. And so, it might be, so if anybody has a business, that's great. But, you could, it depends, it depends on like what our economic outlook is going to be in the future. If things get pretty dire, there might not be a lot of like necessarily money on the table, but if one family in the church is willing to say, hey, we got an extra, maybe they're empty nesters, we got a bedroom for a young man to live with us, and then somebody else is going to say, I'm going to take you to work with me, and I'll buy you lunch every day, and I'll teach you what I know, but I can't pay you. Depending on what the other options are, that's a good start. And then I think, the big thing is like that that I'm not good at. This is like one of the other partners of seeing is, but I think entrepreneurship is very important. And while it's still possible, there has to be entrepreneurial solutions to creating value. You do something that actually creates value, and then you create more opportunities. But right now, most of our entrepreneurship it's so focused on like the maximum profit rather than like the maximum long-term good or something like that. So
fine. So
yeah.
you're looking for the local small-scale political organization. A church is such.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps by extension, a political party.
Yeah.
A group of people believing in some idea, like let's say communism, would do the same. If they can form a comuna, you can say that this will fail, but then what a human enterprise will not fail.
Yeah.
So you're targeting some kind of a local, small-scale political organization. Could be even a town.
Mm-hmm.
Fine. There has to be some kind of a common ideology, and Christianity, any flavor of Christianity locally can do the job.
Yeah.
Okay. And you have to also be prepared for the case of success. In the case of success, there will be wealth accumulated. There will be houses built. There will be grain collected. There will be money gathered in the bank. The minute you strike success, you attack predators. The biggest and the most dangerous is the government.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm speaking out of a certain knowledge of history looking at some case of a success story that I know that I will not cite here explicitly, but maybe later, you have to wait until such a stage of social collapse that at least will remove any danger out, the danger of the bigger government, bigger social organization, the bigger predators, the big capitalist, whoever is a bigger organization than yours, that is the predator that you are afraid of. You have to wait until such a stage of social collapse that will make the small organization and the small community strong enough to protect itself locally. And that day might be coming very soon.
Yeah. Well, one of my thoughts too, and this is at the time, so it's interesting, so I started really considering this and writing it after Trump's loss in 2020. And, thinking like, oh, we were going from a government that was more probably encouraging and amenable to faith-based organizations, entrepreneurship, all that stuff, and then going into the leftist communist regime for 4 years. And my thought was, right now, but one of the big things I think is that, like, the national scale of the media and like the national elections is such a distraction, and it's designed that way to keep people focused on the most important is that we get to vote every 4 years. If it goes our way, we'll be happy for 4 years. If it doesn't, we're going to be sad for 4 years. Totally blinds people to how much they can actually do to improve things in their life right now. So my thought was, well, there's still a lot of opportunities to work within the system. We don't have to worry, like, because there's more people are saying, like, we're waiting for society to collapse, and then they have their hypothetical, like, this is how we're going to start our new world from scratch after the apocalypse. Then there are people really thinking about the between now and then. And, I think even anytime something collapses, there's always some, you say like the nation collapses. Well, you're going to have some states that are doing pretty good after that collapse and some that are going to be doing worse. And then within any of the states, you're going to have certain cities that are doing better and certain cities that are doing worse. And that goes down, like I said, to the family or whatever. So you gotta start with, that's your where your community of integrity has got to be communities of solid families. At least then you kind of have, that's your first most basic thing to hope to weather any kind of disaster. But like I was saying, I think there is a lot of opportunities still, like I think even the, like you can even see it in advertisements and stuff, the woke stuff's out, and like, faith and family kind of stuff is like back in. So it's like, that's like maybe a vibe shift or whatever. So that means that there's an opportunity. And so long as the things that are doing that are growing, strengthening, not directly going against the bigger structures of the government, I don't think you necessarily have to worry about like government action. Because like I knew a lot of people, this was even one of the things, I grew up in Christian churches where, they had this interpretations of the end times, and it was going to be a totalitarian government. And so like they were taking themselves out of local involvement because they were always anticipating that. But it's like, if you've been anticipating that for 40 years and it still hasn't happened yet, you could have been doing a lot more useful stuff in the meantime. So, you know, that might happen, but I also see this sort of as maybe the best way to prevent some sort of totalitarian thing is for people to get more involved in all the structures, starting from the grassroots level upward.
Again, who is your target audience? Is it the pastor, or is it or do you? If you're approaching the pastor, he will tell you, give me the elevator pitch. What is your plan in 3 sentences? I don't.
Okay, in 3 sentences. So let's start with the beneficial thing. Young men are more interested in church now than they have been in a long time. That's good. You got to make sure that if they come to your church, you're prepared to actually guide them towards a life that leads to a job and marriage and being firmly established within the community. If all you have to offer
you
them
have to add vocational education to Bible studies. To merge vocational training with Bible studies.
Yeah.
Fine.
And those support each other, because the Bible gives you a greater reason for why this is important than just the paycheck. Or maybe, or it's why it's better to stay in this town and take a lower paycheck because of the church and the people you know, rather than going to the city and making 20% more and being on all by yourself and, with all the temptations that go along with it. So.
Okay. But what profession? How can we put young men to work in such a way that we have a product or service that we can actually sell for money? What is the business plan?
So I think that I think one thing would be exposing them to a wide range of things. It does have to have some, I think one element of it is work with your hands, skilled trade labor of some sort. But say, it's like a 1-year program, at least by doing that, even if you don't go into that vocation, now you know that you're going to be able to save a lot of money as a homeowner because you can fix things yourself. So that's a good value proposition there. You've reduced your needed income in the future by gaining some skill.
Yeah,
but
we've been through that. We had this discussion before.
Yeah. Then there's but I mean, it could be any of those things that are, in some ways it's, if you get into sales or management, those things can be applicable to a lot of different things, a lot of different types of business, So, maybe you find you're good at sales, you start in construction, you work to something else. I just started from the construction angle because that is one of that's something I'm more familiar with. It also is like, hey, if zoning stuff ever gets loosened or anything like that, then you're in the advantage of, if you can build a house, you will be able, that's a very good survival skill, or if you can build a structure or something, like those are useful skills regardless, in good times or bad.
Well, as far as I'm told, America is huge, and zoning problems are not a problem everywhere. You can always find a place in the middle of America where zoning is not a problem.
Mm-hmm.
and you will be actually invited to build whatever house you want to build.
Yep.
The problem is that at that location, nobody can think of a viable business plan.
Right. So this is the other thing where I would see if you wanted to get things up to like the town. So all the other stuff before that would be like, okay, this is useful maybe to if you have a town that's like on decline. Well, this would be a way to help kind of turn things around maybe. But if you wanted to like go revivify some town or build a community or something, instead of starting from scratch, you find some town that's kind of dying. Maybe, you know, the population's aging, but there's houses there, there's churches there, there's things like that. If you have one of these businesses that does internet stuff or whatever, you know, technological something or other, you know, now, so this is a thing where I think that there is a great benefit of the way that the world is changing, and that there are a lot of jobs that you could do from anywhere. So if you can have a group of people who say, well, we're going to put our headquarter, maybe it's a small company, I don't know, 20, 30 people, but 20 to 30 people decide, hey, let's go to some dying town. We'll buy like an old factory or a mill, and we're going to turn it into an office space, and we'll do our web-based thing there. Well, then that creates the need for those construction people they'll have a building to renovate. They can start building more houses to increase, you know, then that builds the small businesses. You start building the coffee shops, that gets the girls something to do. And then, you know, there's cute waitresses for the guys to strike up a conversation with and all that. So I think it's kind of has to be that way, that men need to go and build something, and then women will come along. So I mean, that's kind of what's going to happen somewhere. Like it's like that's what happens anywhere, is that some big business moves to some place because it's cheap or it's easy to build there, and then that draws all the other stuff along with it. So it's just about intentional.
Yeah, and I want to add to this. Part of the success of the plan is you are going to get a lot of refugees, because people will move into your town that would have never considered doing it before, just because living somewhere else will become actually impossible.
Yeah.
It will be it will be the only option left on the table.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's part of why I think, you know, one of the things that is important is reestablishing that kind of apprenticeship mode of working, because like we have a big problem with refugees and stuff in that we don't know how to integrate them. But it's not really it's not so much of a problem. They need the same, you know, that's the same reason why people get upset with them, because the government gives them a handout. They live in a hotel, you know, and they're getting DoorDash or whatever, and somebody else is having to do the work of running the hotel and delivering the food and making the food. And
yeah, but this is not sustainable, and that is going to collapse.
Yeah.
And as that time when this collapses, then is when you get your refugees coming into your town.
Yeah. So I think in some ways I started this almost just with thinking about the way that my wife and I want to kind of run our household, in that we don't want our children to grow up to be self-centered. So it was always important to us that we have some element of service in what we do. So there will be teenagers that come over in the evening and have dinner at our house or whatever. Or we take them to church and we do projects and things like that. It's not a big part of our life, but if it's enough of our life that our life has an opening, you know, a slot for some unknown person to come in and be helped, you know, and that's even to say we can handle one person, maybe we can handle two people, helping two people. Well, if every family can figure out how to help one person or two people, or help them in different ways, you know, one person has the house with the rooms from the stay in, somebody else has some work that they can do, even if it's not necessarily paid. It's keeping them busy. It's teaching them a skill. Like, everybody's been trained to kind of build their life around the idea that there are no strangers, or that strangers are always supposed to be kept out. And I think part of this idea was what I saw in the idea with the Feast of Tabernacles, because it says you have to invite the widows and the foreigners, but they're a smaller percentage. So that means, well, you're not getting overrun. You have a family, you invite one or two guests. That's the kind of the right way. So it's always about building that openness to somebody new coming in. And if if you have enough of a people advantage of strength in numbers, you don't have to worry about being afraid of them. Like if your sons are grown or something, then another man coming in is not a threat. If it's a widow, she's not a threat, like to a regular family. So, it takes a little wisdom, but I think it's just that, to always be
Well,
people.
I said the individual is never a threat to you.
Yeah.
If you are already a small community,
Mm-hmm.
It's the larger communities that are the threat. You're not afraid for any single person. You're afraid of the other tribe.
Well, I think in that sense, one thing. So one of the interesting questions, I had a conversation with Gavin. We were talking about, like, what would the Amish, what would they do? Because they're like pacifists, and they won't fight, they won't defend. But I think about, like, what if they just go somewhere empty, plant their orchards, build their houses, whatever. Then the raiders come, you just leave. Take your tools with you, because you can do it somewhere else. So maybe it's a little bit of that sometimes. Now, I don't think that's necessarily the solution for everybody, but in the extreme sense, I think.
Are they more pacifist than Abraham?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, Abraham went on that rescue mission for a lot. I don't think they would do that. I think they're more pacifists.
Well, I will dispute their theology, but I'm mentioning this on purpose because in the spirit of tents before temples, I always wondering about what social situation is Abraham living in, because he's supposed to be this one family. He's an immigrant. He's just immigrated with his wife and a few servants, and he's in a foreign land, and he doesn't have much property. And then when the time comes, he gathers 300 people to go and beat some 4 kings with.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of a social structure is he living in? And I don't think it's anyone that we can recognize. We don't recognize it because it doesn't exist today. But living in the Middle East, I sort of can start to imagine it.
Yeah.
So this is your small community. It is about Michael's Sartorian wife and their children and a few people around that work with them. And somehow, in time of need, they can gather 300 people around them.
I gotta run out. I'll be right back.
Young God, when will you ever show your face? Two people watching now. Cannot build a community with 2 people watching now. Not enough.
You're gonna be noisy? Yeah. He's waiting for Mama. Okay, tell me more about Abraham, and I'll mute it.
Okay, so I'll repeat myself. This is one family. This is Michael Sartorian wife coming to stay in a new town where they're completely strangers. And they have few people working with them. And they don't have much property. Living in sort of in tents and wandering around with the sheep. But in time of need, they suddenly raise 300 people to go to war with them. So this sort of a community is, let's say, it's around the charisma of that patriarch, but probably already also around some kind of a religion that he is establishing. I think this is the lesson. This is the example to follow.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I mean, I think it was a religion about a more sustainable way of life in some ways. Well, I might have to end the stream.
Fine.
But it was good talking with you. I will finish the book another time. Okay, Phil, say bye-bye. Okay, that one was bye-bye.